Welcome to the second part of the editing. I've selected the pictures that I think it's great, and let's get started. So here is the couple standing on the bridge, and I really like the composition. So most of the time, what I use for the color editing is Taylor Jackson's presets. In this case, I really like the warm one, and you can tell right now it's pretty dark for the subject, so we'll just bring the exposure up and have the shadows even up more, and we'll create a circular filter and to boost up the subject. And you can tell it's a big difference. And I want overall probably a little bit of closure so the eyes can stay on the subject. And I like probably a little bit more warm tone. And probably overall brightness boost in the center. Alright, here's the finished product. And let's see what it looks like before. Yep, pretty big difference. Let's move on. So here is the same position, but I changed where I took the picture. So this one I have something covered up the background so it looks more interesting. And what we do is we'll just follow the same procedure with last picture. So boost up the brightness and bring down the highlight and create a filter to boost up the couple even more. In this case, I like to have some closure as well, and probably some graduated filter. Yep, I think that looks great. Here's a same picture but with a different composition. So we just use the previous and we can instantly get the same result. And for this one, I think there's a little bit too much of green going on. So I will turn this to 0. And this is just a little bit too bright. That looks good to me. And this shot is very similar. And I'll probably choose this shot just because it has a more variety of the trees. So we'll use the warm presets and boost up the exposure. And have the center to be much more bright. And we'll create an even bigger circle so it looks more natural. So for this one, I'll probably do the feather around 85, so you don't see the white edge around the couple. Yep, I think that looks good. And we'll just bring a little bit of vignette back. Yep, I really like this picture. And here is a casual photo of them walking on the road. And for this one, I like how they hold hands to each other. So I'll just have to focus like this, and again I will choose the one presets and boost up the brightness. It's always good to take pictures underexposed rather than overexposed, especially with the modern day cameras, because you can recover a lot of detail out of it. And probably a bit more warm tone, just like this. And the bottom looks a little bit distracting, so I will bring down the exposure as well as highlight and put some black. A little bit more is good. And I will create another one just for the bottom. Yep, so if we don't do this, it's pretty distracting, but if we add some shadows underneath, then our focus will be on these the couple. And again, we'll boost some brightness just a bit, not too much. Looks wonderful. Let's move on. Yep, this is a similar shot, but they're looking at each other. So we'll try the previous, and it looks almost works. And we need some a little bit adjustment. Now the bottom looks way too underexposed, so we'll remove one of it and bring up some lights back. And I can see a lot of purple-ish fringing going on there. So there are two things we can do. First one is we can click the remove the aberration, but it didn't help. So the second choice is we can bring down the purple, and it's instantly gone. And since there is no much purple going on with this picture, so bring down the purple saturation works great. This picture, I really like the trees curve and how they are standing right under where the light hits. So I almost create a softbox or a flashlight experience. And we'll try the warm presets. And as usual, bring up the highlight, bring up the exposure, and a little bit of bring down the highlight. And to make this picture more interesting, what we can do is we can create a graduated filter, and we will bring down the shadows just a tiny bit, as well as highlights. So now it feels like the light is hitting from this way to this way. And down here is probably a little bit too dark, so I will make this just a little bit more bright. Yep, that looks good. And if we see that before and after, you can really tell the difference. I think this looks perfect. So this is the exact same spot where I zoomed in and I let them to do kissing. So again, we'll use the same presets, and I feel like this is a really good color. There are some fade area going on, and I'll probably just bring up the exposure a little bit, and I will create the gradient filter to boost up the skin tone. And for this one, we can also do some vignette. So now this picture looks focused and looks very romantic. So I was happy to find some kind of leaf covering them, part of their face, and I think this is a very interesting angle as well. So what I will do is I will try to crop it and make it even more close. Yeah, and I think this looks awesome. I'm probably a little bit light over here. Yep, that looks good. And maybe a tiny bit of vignette. And this is the different composition, but I think this works very well. And one thing I forgot is about the ring, where we can make this ring pop by adding a little bit of highlight and decrease the clarity and bring up the exposure. And if we zoom out, it should be very subtle, but you can notice it. It just makes it more crystal-like. So let's move on. So this is a very nice composition, and I basically asked them to walk back and then walk towards me. And I took pictures both ways. So the first thing is to make the road straight. actually this is not straight, so the road isn't straight, and probably a little bit is good. This helps. So I'll cropping a little bit more. And for this one, let me guess, warm looks good. The color makes it just too much desaturated, so I'll choose the warm again. And it's good to keep all of the pictures in one kind of preset, so it looks unified. And for this one, I will also make the road just a tiny bit darker. Yep, this looks good to me. And this is the picture where they walk back, and we can try use the previous. It looks good, but now the angle is off. So we'll bring back the angle, and maybe I can make this a square image. Yep, this looks great, and I will make them pop just a little bit more. Yep, this looks good. And this is the same kind of composition, so what I'll do is I'll just click this picture and this one and use the sync. And you can pretty much leave it all open instead of crop and spot removal, and it should work just fine. And I will make the couple a tiny bit more light. Yep, this looks good to me. Awesome. So since I really like the background, I have them stop and then do some poses. For this one, I think it looks a little bit too they appear a little bit too big in the frame, but I will deliver this image anyway, just because they are in really good shape, and their facial expression is really good. Yep, this looks good. Yep, and then I noticed that, so what it is, I exit the crop mode on my camera, so now it looks much wider. And I'll probably use Photoshop to remove this root, but we'll see if this is possible. So we'll use the previous option, see if it can apply on this one, and it actually worked very well. And I'll bring some shadows to the ground, and they look fantastic. And right next to it, there's a structure, and there's a stair where they can look at the view. So I asked them if they can point somewhere out of it and have a chat with it. And this is exactly what they did. So I really like the composition, and I probably would like to have a bit more warm tone because it looks romantic. I'll bring the highlights down and opened up the shadows of the couple. And make that a bit brighter. And you can tell the color looks off just a tiny bit. So what I will do is make the temperature a little bit warmer, and now it looks better. And if we turn this off, you can tell there is a big difference in it. Yep. And I'll probably make this side a tiny bit darker to create a fake shadow, even though the sun is right over this area. And if you zoom into this area, we can tell there are a lot of fringing going on. And the same trick is we can try bring down the purple saturation and see if we can solve that problem. And this time it did, but it's not perfect. So what we can do is we can turn this all off and click on the remove the aberration, and it looks okay. And what we can also do is we can zoom in and then use the hue slider and click this spot and then somehow change the color of the purple to another color, and this time it's a lot better. And if we zoom out and see if we changed any other part of the image, and turns out it did it. So this is great, and let's see if we can change the red to more purplish, just a tiny bit. And now if you see, the fringe is almost gone, and I think that's totally acceptable. Yep, big difference right there. And this image is good. And inside of this structure there is there's an aisle, and then I like the lightning, so I asked them if they can kiss and do some poses there. I like this image, but they just appear a little bit too big. So and then there are almost no depth of the aisle, so I'll pass this image. And this one's much better. You can see they're holding hands in as well as the ring. So we'll go with this one. And for this one, what I'm doing is just to bring up the shadow of their face as well as some part of the of their shoulder. And I will bring down some highlights of the structure to make it more three-dimensional. Yep, I think that looks good. And I asked him to do the same trick over here, just because I like the fall off over this area. I find out the pose is bit distracting, and that looks a little bit unbalanced. But I don't want to crop this area, just because it will make the subject appear too large in the frame. So probably we'll pass on with this picture for now. This one looks much better. I really like how their face. So I'll try to edit out this picture. And for this one, I feel like this is intentional, and it creates a closure so that you can always look the subject. And I'll make the back a tiny bit darker. Yeah, I think this looks great. And then we walked outside of the park, and there's a really nice tree with some blossom going on, and we took some picture over there. And this is a pretty formal one. I think this looks good, so I will leave it like this. This one's close up, but I will follow the same step how I edited last photo. So I click on the previous, and I think this looks as good as last one. Make sure this is rated, and this is more of a relaxed one where they have some motion going on. And again, I will choose the previous button. It looks perfect. I really like it. And probably same thing for this picture as well, and this picture. So sometimes you get lucky to have all the lightings and poses all worked out, and you only really need one click and it's done. And this picture, I walked very back, and I used the 85mm with the crop, so you're roughly getting around 90 to 105. And I found out at the tree where it's generating a great circle-ish blur in the front, and you can tell there's some motion in the back, so this is a great composition. And I will try to make this area pronounced. And what I can do is I can make the highlights a little bit more, bring up the highlights, and I will duplicate it. And let's see the difference. Yep, it's better, and I think this looks good. And another thing we can do is we can bring down the general highlight and then do something yet. And I'll I'll do some more over here. And I'm getting lazy, so I'm just creating layers of a little bit of exposure. And right here it looks kind of busy, so what I'll do is I'll just make the exposure down so less people will notice what happened there and focus on this area. So here's the before and after. And what we did is we create a center of focus as well as bring out some of the exposure of the waterfall, so it looks more emotion like. And since I'm standing exactly where I am, I will just use the previous, and it worked out perfectly. And this one as well. And for this one, they're standing a little bit too far, so what I would do is I will crop in to around here and even like this, so it makes it more interesting. And then they change the outfit, so I waited for them to come back, and then we went up to the little hill and start to take picture over there. And because we're shooting around 11ish and the sun is very, very bright, so I was trying to take as many pictures in the shadow as possible. But with this preset and all of the leaves, it almost create like a afternoonish golden hour picture where it's much more dramatic than the morning style. And for this one, I will also bring down some exposure in the stairs and make them a little bit more brighter. Yep. Awesome. And this is a close-up of them, and let me try use the previous, and it worked very well. And again, we'll use the previous, and fantastic. And sometimes when you take picture, try to use some kind of foreground and use some overlays, and then it will create some interesting shapes to make the picture a lot more dynamic and interesting. And they happen to bring a very interesting sign, and they like to take photo with, so let's see if it helps. And for this picture, I was trying to protect the highlight in the back, and so I can recover it later, but I really underexposed the foreground. So let me see if I can bring the foreground up. And I think this part looks good, but they look a bit more dark, so what I will do is create an individual circular filter of them. And I think I used a flashlight in this picture because you can see some of the reflection of on their screen, on their skins, but it only helped a little bit. Let's see. Yep, this makes him much brighter, and compared to the original, it looks much better. And same thing, I will bring down the exposure in the foreground so we can focus on this area. And I'll probably make a tiny circular filter to boost up their face even more. Yep, this looks much better. And since the sun is around 11ish, it's hitting really, really high. And I was trying to create such a romantic shot during the sunset. So I have to make my angle really, really down. But I think this worked out pretty well. And I tried to dial down the aperture to create a blade effect. But I think this works just as fine. And I'll make it more warm. And now it really looks like it's taken in the afternoon. And if you cannot bring the highlights down just because it's all white over here, what you can do is you can use the dehaze. And now the subject is much more pronounced while you're still getting the sound flare effect. And I think this looks very, very, very romantic. I think this is very simple, but yet powerful. So I'll leave it like this, and this is the original. This is the after. It'd be great if I can add something yet to make this pop, make the center pop a little bit more. And they asked me to if they can switch spots, and say yes. But this one, I think, first of it's out of focus, but second, I think they are occupying a little bit too much of space in this picture, so we'll use this instead. And for these series of picture, what I did is I told the bride to tell a joke. I mean, to the groom to tell a joke to the bride. Apparently, he's very bad at making jokes, but yet she still laughed. And for this whole series of pictures, the warmth presets work very well. And if you're interested in getting these presets, I'll make a link down there to Taylor Jackson's Patreon, where you can download all of the presets. And I'll make it a vignette. I make the temperature a little bit warmer. And I'll make their faces just a little bit more, tiny bit brighter. And this looks good. Yep. If you, this is a great picture, but now it looks much more romantic, and it almost feels like you're taking the picture in the afternoon. And I chose a series of a couple pictures for reaction, and I think this looks very, very cute and funny. For example, this picture right here looks a bit of foggy, so we will just use some dehaze and maybe create a graduated filter and use the dehaze like this. And now it looks much better. And the whole picture looks a little bit flat, so I will use some more graduated filters to bring down the edges. Just like this. And I would like to have a little bit more contrast of their face, because I think it's a little bit out of focus. So I'll boost up some clarity and add some contrast in it. Yep, that looks perfect. And same thing over here, a bit too much. Yep, that looks perfect. And we were happen to find a little bamboo forest, and I still use the 85, and it creates some beautiful backdrop bokeh. And same thing, will bring up the exposure and bring down some highlight and make their faces a bit more bright. Yep, just a couple of clicks and makes a world of difference. And this looks good. And I basically I panned around of the subject and try to catch some interesting angle, and I think this is one of them where it's kind of blocked out, but you can still see the eyes as well as some of their facial, which is very romantic, I think. And by the way, what the couple request from me is they would like to take as many romantic shots as possible. So I was trying my best effort to make them satisfied. And for this one, I really don't like the color because the rest of the image are very bright. However, the subjects are a bit of too dark compared to the environment. So what I will do is I will make this picture black and white and see if this helps with. And now what I will do is I will boost up the exposure as a shadow, but then I will decrease the clarity and make the sharpness less sharpness and less noise. And because I believe this preset brings up a lot of grain going on, and this picture is much better than the previous one, I think, even though I like the color, but this one's more unified. Yep, now they are much brighter compared to the environment. I think her eyes was closed, and unfortunately, but I can try to edit it. And I will create heavy vignette and bring the midpoint closer to the center. And then what I do is I will not invert the circular filter and bring down the highlights as much as possible. Yep, like it. And this picture is obviously focus in the sign and have the subject in a background, but still you can see their shape. And for this one I use aperture 4.5, and since they're standing in the shadow, so I have to boost up the ISO and have the camera set around 1/250th a second. And this one we can still use the warm preset and bring up the exposure and bring down some highlights just a tiny bit and have them a little bit more pronounced. And this looks good to me, but I will still bring down some overall brightness around the edge. I think this looks good, and this is, you can tell they're smiling, so yep, I think that looks awesome. This is not perfectly centered, level, not too much, so bring it down a little bit like this. And somehow this tree was involved, or got a lot of signature of previous couples, and apparently they want a photo of some sort around this tree. So I asked him if they can do a hide and seek like poses, and this is what they did, and I think it worked out. And for this one I'll probably bring down some clarity just because it looks more romantic, and because this area looks busy, so bring down some clarity helps with it. And same thing applied to this one. Let's try use previous and see if it looks good. And I'll probably move this a little bit towards over here, and that looks good. And apparently the groom had some thought about creating a picture with in 3D. So he is trying to hold her hands, and I think this looks pretty close. Not quite, but pretty close. And for this one I used 35mm, so it's a much wider view. And aperture 4.0, I wish I can maybe set to 5.6 or even 8, so that you can see a more clear hand. But I think this works just as fine, and we'll try to use the previous. And for this one I will make the groom brighter, so his hands is more pronounced, as well as part of the groom's portion. That's a little too much. Yep, like this. And this is a interesting place where the bride wants to take pictures of those flowers. And actually there are a lot more flowers up over here, although I can't quite catch it because I only have the 35-85 in hand. But I think this is acceptable. And then they did a back-to-back pose. And this looks good as well. And this is where they were walking down, and then they find out this path to have some more flowers. So we'll again use the one preset and have the exposure just a little bit more and bring down the highlight, and have the stare to be less pronounced so we can focus on the main subject. And I think this picture looks awesome, but I will just add a little bit more highlights to this subject. Great. And we're almost till the end. So again, this is the same waterfall, but since they changed their outfit, they would like to do a different poses with it. And you can tell it's a big difference of the waterfall with this picture and compared to this one. So this one I used 35, and then I set it to 1.4 so I can get some kind of blur to separate the subject. And I think this works out pretty much. And I'll bring the highlights a bit more, and perhaps bring down some shadows. Yep, now it looks much better. And I'll use the previous. And actually works out surprisingly well. And I'll bring down a little bit more of light over here as well as here. And you can see, if you can see the original and after, it makes the subject pronounced, so your eyes will directly follow. And this one is a detail shot where I asked him to cross their hands and show up the ring, but we can try use the same effect as last one, but what we'll do is we'll have this center focus to their hands, just like this, and I will add more detail on the ring. And we have some fringing going on over there, but what we can do is make this saturation desaturated and boost up the clarity, and as well as some highlights. Actually bring down some highlights and declarify it and boost some add some exposure. And we will use the hue or saturation slider and make the purple less pronounced. And I think it looks good. And this is another detail shot, and you can tell this ring is in focus. And we'll again use the presets. I really like it because it makes the image much more romantic in one click. And for this one, we will put more attention to the ring. And since you can tell this part is slightly out of focus, we'll bring out some clarity as well as sharpness. And what we can do is we can even add some dehaze. And now we can do some even more exposure. And let's zoom out and see the difference. Yep, it's there. And another thing we can do is we can make the overall image darker and have this ring pronounced. And this is before and this is after. I like it. I like it. And this is a similar spot, but they like to do some more freedom or freestyle posing. And for this one, I like to have some of the sky appear. And then turns out it's overexposed, but it's okay. And make the face a bit more brighter. And have the overall image tiny bit darker. And a bit more warm. Let's see. Yeah, that looks good. And this one didn't quite work well just because there's some really nice background. However, where the groom stands has a lot of shuttles and highlights crossing and makes the subject busy, so we'll pass this picture. And for this one, I use some flash so I can protect the background as well as have the details of their face, so I can boost it up later on, just like this, and bring down highlights a bit more. So now it looks almost like an HDR effect, but I think it works very well. And we can have a bit more, and just like this. And we'll bring down some vignette. Yep, I think that looks good. And I'll probably create another graduate filter to even make the background more pronounced. And for this one, what we can do is we can use a trick of hue saturation and make this pink more pinkish. And I think that looks awesome. And we can make the green more green, so it has a bit more contrast in it. And we can try to adjust the blue on top of his head because it looks kind of unnatural. and we can desaturate some of the blue, but we'll have to be careful of their chains. And we can try to bring up some of the lights of the pink and bring down some of the blues. So now it looks much better, and it's before and after. Yep. And we will do the same thing for this one and move up. And this is another angle of the bridge after they changed the outfit. And I think this is one of the classic shot in this garden. By the way, this is the Japanese garden in San Jose. It's a very beautiful place to walk around and to take a picture. So I did the same thing, and to boost up their face, and I will make this part darker. And have some vignette going on. And it's before and after. Much better. And we'll just use the same previous, and it works. And then speaking of the overlay, if you remember, there are a lot of flowers going on in the background, and this is where exactly I stand. So I use some of the flowers to cover up some of the background, and it creates much more romantic hidden shot. And I really like this one, or this one and this one. So we'll see how it looks. Probably like this one more. So same thing, warm preset, and bring down some of the highlight, and we'll make this part darker. And bring up the details and shadows. And what we can do is we can even zoom in and what we can do is we can even zoom in and bring this part of the shadow up. And I can still see some of the purple fringing, so I will remove it and bring down the purple a little bit more. And now it's much better. Still there, but kind of hard to see it. And I will use the previous. And I will probably do some crop. So now it looks more cinematic. And now make sure this is leveled. And to help with focus, I will bring down the highlights of this part and decrease the clarity. And add some vignette to it. And I think this looks fantastic. And this is the vertical version of it. So let me try if previous works. And it didn't work well, but we can use the same adjustment we did, but then apply it and I'll probably want a little bit of crop like this. Awesome. And this one, it's even better or worse, depends on how you view it. But let me try if previous helps. I think the edges are too dark, so you can try a different version of this picture. Remove it. And we can make this picture much brighter and a little bit more or less, and then add some magenta in it. You can tell right here it looks off because we turned on the purple. So now it looks much better. And I think now it looks better. And we'll go with it. And there's a funny version of them, so we can sync the settings of the previous. Actually, not this setting, but this one. And it's just a tiny bit too dark. And we'll duplicate this layer or a filter and apply on there on his head just to make it more brighter. And for this one we can also crop the top and some part of the bottom to make a cinematic feel. And here is the same tree where I asked him to go down and look at each other. And this one I would like to have less warm so that you can show up this skin tone correctly. And I think it looks good. And for this one we need some dehaze. And probably turn down some of the exposure, especially this part. think there's too much of foreground. And this looks good. And this is the entrance, or possible entrance. And I noticed that the top doesn't really align with the bottom, so I have to sacrifice the top so that the subject looks leveled. And one thing we can fix is to crop some of it, and the illustration of it makes it leveled. And you can tell I tried to protect the background as well as have some sort of the highlights there. And let's see if this works. And surprisingly, it worked very well. But I really don't like the 100% HDR look, so I will still have some of the highlights blown out while creating some circular filter to boost up the subject front. And we'll create separate filters just for the hand. And as usual, we'll bring down some shadows in the foreground. And maybe even this area, because I found out this to be a little bit too distracting. Yep, and this is before and after. It looks much better. And maybe what we can do is have this area, I will bring down some highlights in the background and boost up the exposure and shadows even more. And we can see a lot of purple fringing going on, so yep, bring down the purple. And remove it. And oh, this is the luminous. We need to be in the saturation part. And now it looks much better. And one more thing we can do is change the hue of the bluish purple to another color. And you can tell it's affecting the shirt as well as different other different parts. So unfortunately, we cannot do too much about the fringing, but it's already a lot better. Yeah, well, now it looks a bit desaturated, so we'll add some saturation back. And what we can even do is to apply the color back separately. So the jeans is more bluish, so we'll add more blue towards it. And for the shirt, we'll add some yellow. So now if we look at the original and after, it's a pretty big difference actually. And I think this is pretty good. And same thing for the rest of the picture. I think they will work out just as good as this one. maybe not, or yep, because this adjustments are off. And now it should be much better. And since this is a little bit covered, we'll use some dehaze and see if we can remove that and bring down some highlights. It works okay, but let's see if other images can help. Yep, this works very well. And I can tell yep, this is way too much. Remove that and have this to the head and to the whole body. Yep. And same thing for this picture. Looks good, and we just need to move some of the adjustment a little bit more. I think that looks good. And this is the last picture. And we'll use the same preset and bring up the shadows as well as the exposure and bring down the highlight. And for this one, we'll use the brush tool to erase this part. And I think this looks good. And if you happen to make this far, then you're really liking to take pictures, and stay tuned for even more videos.